You may have already noticed that I have some feelings about JPEGs. JPEGs are wonderful, and JPEGs are terrible. I feel like, as the most common file format, we're all pretty used to them and pretty comfortable with them, so I feel like I need to stress the pitfalls of JPEGs, because by virtue of the fact that they're the most common file you're going to come in contact with, we're all kind of used to them and kind of accept them. So we accept them as neutral or good. So I want you to be aware of where you can run into problems with JPEGs and what issues you should look to avoid so that you don't run kind of afoul of the downside to JPEGs, because any file format has pluses and minuses. And so we need to be conscious of them when we're using them. So let's start with the good side. What's great about JPEGs? Well, first off, the fact they're super compatible. Everybody's comfortable with them. If you send a JPEG to somebody, they're not going to feel like I need a special program to open this. They're native to web browsers. They're kind of a default. So we can also state how much compression we want on them. They're not one size fits all. So that's wonderful. If you're doing something that you know the file size needs to be very small, and you're okay with the fact that you're going to take a hit on quality, you can make super small file sizes. On the flip side, you can save it at the top level of compression and know that, okay, I'm not going to lose quite as much data. So the fact that you can select how high quality you want it to be, that's a plus for it. Now, one thing that's unique to JPEGs to some of the other ones we're going to be talking about, like pings, is that you can have both on-screen RGB color space, but it also supports print color-based CMYK. So that's why you might actually be able to send a JPEG to a printer, especially online if they need a smaller file size. And that can be really useful because, again, you're not going to want to send a file to a printer, a professional printer, that's in the RGB color space. You're not going to want to print out using your high-quality photo printer from something that's RGB without converting it, because you're not going to know what it's actually going to look like. So this way you can natively support both print and screen graphics. So that's wonderful. So you can use them in both web or in print. And the reason that it does get used so much by so many people is because you have, relatively speaking, small file sizes for the quality that you get. Especially, and this is where we run into the issue, they're especially good for on-screen viewing. So that means that you can have a file size that's easy enough to transfer on the web, even if someone doesn't have a wonderful high-speed connection. So you can get it on your phone, you can get it wherever, that looks really crisp and clear on your screens. I'm focusing on the on-screen here because this points to where the problem lies with JPEGs. How exactly does a JPEG get to be so small and yet retain so much quality? Because every time you save a JPEG, the data it throws away is print data. So that means that if you opened up a JPEG and you hit save as, say you did this 1,000 times, 100,000 times, it's not going to look visibly different to you. Not perceptively, not if it's a decent size image that you start off with. The file size, how many kilobytes, megabytes, gigabytes it is, that file size will have gone down. You go, how's it get smaller? All I'm doing is I'm hitting save. I'm not doing anything to it. Well, every time it saves it, it's throwing away more print data, and more print data, and more print data. 1,000 times, 100,000 times. And so it's gotten smaller in terms of megabytes. But it looks the same on screen. So go to print it. Someone I know in grad school did this. And it was really interesting to see the fact that when I looked at it on the computer, you couldn't tell which one was the one that they started with and which one was the end product. But when you printed it, one of them was just streaks of ink and the other one was a photograph. So obviously that was an extreme where they saved as so many times. You probably wouldn't be doing it a million times. But even if you're doing it 5 times, 10 times, 100 times, that's where you can start to see a little bit of difference. And I've got these simulated images here. You can see here, now obviously this is on screen, so I'm having to simulate what it would look like when you printed it out. So again, on screen, you're not going to notice a difference. But if you went to go print this graphic, once saved, looks fine. Especially, I find like if you look at the kind of colors of the lights in the buildings, you don't really notice it so much. But when you look at the very subtle gradation and color in the sky, you see a massive difference between 50 saves and 1. So this is why, beyond the fact that it doesn't support layers, you don't want to work in the JPEG from the beginning. Because every time you decide to change something, every time you move something, you get some feedback, you need to change the text, you find out that the date's wrong. Every time you save it, you're throwing away more print data. Now, if you know you are never, ever, ever going to need to print out your image, maybe that's fine. But how do you know that sometime down the line, you're not going to need to use that image for print? And therein lies the issue. And that's why, if you can get from a stock photo company a TIFF, you want to get a TIFF. Because hopefully, when people are posting their stock photographs, they're doing it straight from the originals and then just saving it once and posting it. But you don't know. And so what if it's been saved 50 times and you've downloaded it, you go to print it, and you go, it looks fine on screen. Why does it look like this when I printed it out? Well, maybe because it's lost print data 50 times, 100 times. And that's out of your control because it's before you even got the file. So remembering to keep in mind, this is one of the reasons why you want to start with a high quality image that you know hasn't been compressed and lost data. And hopefully this illustrates why, even if it looks fine on screen, if you've got something that you want to print, you need to be careful about what it's actually going to look like when it comes out of your printer. Now, to be clear, just opening the JPEG and closing it doesn't introduce data loss. It's the saving that's the problem. Every time you save it, the computer rewrites the data. The computer runs it through the compression. It runs it through its like algorithm, its way of like figuring out how to store the data. So the data loss, this irrevocable, you can never get it back, data loss, happens when you save. So this is why, if your client isn't going to edit the image, your client doesn't need to click save ever. It's just they're going to open it, they're going to use it places, but they're not going to go in and do anything to it. That's why you're fine giving them it as a JPEG if they're going to use it on screen. If they're going to print it, you might want to consider another format, or you give them a very high quality JPEG and you just make it very clear to them, please don't ever save this as something else. So if you're going to use it on screen and they're not going to be editing it, JPEGs are great. Really good for photographs, a lot like Photoshop. JPEGs are very good at capturing that detail and image quality, and on screen you can get small photos, small images, small file sizes, high quality. Again, if you are using a JPEG in something like InDesign, we're not really going to get into InDesign, but like when we were talking about with Illustrator where it just references the file, you're not actually changing the file, you're not going to lose quality. It's when you bring it into Photoshop, you open it in your image viewer, and you re-save it that you end up bringing in that degradation. So make sure that you don't change that original JPEG. Again, if you get it from the internet, you might want to resave it as another file format like a TIFF or like a Photoshop document. You can't add any data, but it means you're not going to lose anything more than's already been lost. So if you download from a stock photo site, a JPEG, please don't do something to it and then resave it as a JPEG more than 5 times. I really would say don't, if you're making any changes to it, don't save it as a JPEG. Unless, again, that's the end product that you're doing. Because, again, every time you save it, you're losing data. So what I would do is I would bring it into Photoshop and I would save it as a Photoshop document, make whatever changes I need to make, do all the editing I'm going to do, and then export it out as a JPEG from there. Because again, you can't add back data that's lost, but you want to make sure that you don't compound that data loss, that you don't put data loss on top of data loss on top of data loss until you end up with this streaky mess.